There may be times where your animation calls for the realistic motion of objects and how they react to other objects in an environment. This is known as dynamics. It calculates the realistic interaction of objects and forces in order to simulate more natural object motion. In 3ds Max, Mass Effects is the dynamic simulation program you use in order to simulate real-world object interaction. Mass Effects can realistically simulate rigid body dynamics, enabling complex scenes requiring realistic object motion to be created with a relatively little amount of additional effort. The simulation available through Mass Effects is previewed directly in the viewport. Through the Mass Effects interface, animators can control object properties as well as play back the simulation using whichever viewport rendering option they want. There are three main types of objects that can be used within a simulation. Static objects become part of the simulation that are locked in place and unable to move. Dynamic objects are objects that will be acted on during the simulation. These objects, like static objects, can have various properties, including mass and other physical properties. However, the dynamic object will move with realistic motion during the simulation and will interact with static objects as well as kinematic objects. Kinematic objects, like dynamic objects, are objects that are acted on during the simulation. However, kinematic objects can have keyframe animation applied to them and be used to affect the motion of dynamic objects. Mass Effects also provides a method of creating dynamic constraints. For instance, you can apply a hinge constraint in order to constrain a door so it only opens along its hinge axis. Using a combination of the three types of objects, you can now effectively combine dynamic simulation and keyframe and procedural animation all at the same time. Another form of dynamics built into 3ds Max is the ability to perform cloth simulation. Cloth simulation allows you to create a realistic simulation of both loose cloth and clothing. For example, you can simulate the tablecloth lying down on top of the table, and you can also simulate a character wearing a shirt and a dress. The cloth simulation within 3ds Max provides controls and parameters to allow for the simulation of multiple fabric types, and you can adjust the parameters to get any fabric you need. The biggest benefit of cloth simulation is the ability to simulate complex interactions with other objects in the scene. This allows for the application of clothing on characters, as well as the creation of scene elements like curtains.